A couple disclaimers. The first is that this is going to require me to use both hands and talk at the same time, which for the people who know me is risky. So if the slides go backwards and I lose track of where I am, I'll apologize up front. This presentation is called Anti-Patterns of Scaling Startups. And the title was an inspiration from a friend of mine named Jeff Barrett, who was the CTO at a company called Stitch Fix. He recently shared some notes on problems with scaling, with getting startups going and following them as they grow. Just a little bit about Stitch Fix. They were founded in 2011. In 2015, they did $977 million worth of business. Right? So that's not market cap. That's revenue in the door. So they went to $1 billion in 4 years. So he saw some change. And what he did, they went public and he retired for a couple of years, and then because of his experience, spent a few years being called into various organizations that were having trouble getting products out the door or getting their development done the way they wanted to do it. And at CTO Club, that's about 40 or 50 of us in San Francisco who get together every month, he shared his notes with the group. And it was very well received. So I had a presentation that I've always done on dealing with change, and it inspired me to reorder it a little bit and change some of the titles. I think you'll enjoy it. And his notes and his presentation, since he was a geek talking to geeks, was Anti-Patterns of Scaling Startups, which means common problems with growing startups, and this is the reason why he had standing room only for the session, what it really means is why you'll be fired as CTO and head of technology or product. My background is I've been doing startup software I can't actually do the subtraction, it's been that long. This is my 7th startup over 25 or 30 years. So the original presentation comes from the experience through all of those years and a few trials and tribulations along the way. So I'm just going to walk through this. I'm going to give you 10 things that you can do that are going to get screwed up and get you in trouble. All right? The first one is equating product management with product managers. And I'm starting there because it's sort of the beginning of a lot of other problems, and it's one of the most common things I see when I go in, and I work with other organizations as well. I say, boy, we don't really know what we're doing. We're going to get some more product managers in. They're going to go write a whole bunch of stuff up, and things will be great. And they'll pass all that wisdom down throughout the organization, and we'll make great stuff. But it doesn't really work that way, because product management is a process. When you're building a product for a startup and you're starting off, or you're building a new product in an existing company, somebody has an idea, or you've got a mission, or you set up objectives that you're trying to accomplish. And ultimately, that's going to turn into code. And as you work your way through that process, more and more detail gets added, right? And more decisions get made until the programmer is there making lots and lots of the final decisions as he puts it into the programs. And so what you need to think about is not how many product managers do I need in order to get my things done, but how do I effectively manage that process of expanding the amount of detail, the more decisions we make as we go through the process, in order to get to the right place so that it's as efficient as possible and we end up with the right thing at the end, which is harder to do than, of course, most people think. Part of this comes from sort of the mindset. The product manager will write some requirements, maybe that'll go to a business analyst. They'll turn that into some more specs. So more detail, maybe the programmer or the engineer will write, an approach document and then go into code. And the problem with this is that every time you go down that chain, information is lost or information is gained further down the pipe, and the only way that everybody still knows what's going on is by doing constant reviews of what you're doing, right? And it's inefficient. So this got driven. One of the main points that Jeff made is he said one of the biggest mistakes he sees people making is writing too much specs, which seems counterintuitive. So rather than focusing on making sure that everybody knows what they're doing, they worry about writing to the nth detail down on paper. Yeah, this is where I'm going to get lost in sequence a little bit. So I'll get back to that topic in a second. The second problem that we see is what we call lack of cross-functional teams. So we almost always start off organized by technology groups. So I got my phone people, I got my server people, and so on and so forth. And when you're small, a project will go and they'll just all sit together and do it. And then they'll start to break up into those groups. They each have their own managers. And the way most people end up doing it then is when there are projects that end up involving multiple groups, the managers get together, they coordinate the activities, so on and so forth. So the managers talk, then the managers talk back to their people, then the people talk back to the managers, and everybody eventually ends up with what we call cross-functional teams, where a team ends up being composed of slices through the organization that's by functional area. And this almost always happens too late, because that project team has to be composed of a set of people and managed as a different set of people in a matrix rather than the line organization, the functional organization that people were used to. Related to that, most people when they're starting off, you're starting off with a small group of people, everybody knows each other, things are going great, we move forward, we're doing so well, we got to get more people involved. And so when you've got a small group of people, like 3 people, you can see I've got my lines of communication between my 3 people. And now I'm going to add 4 people to my team. And the lines of communication just explode. Now imagine, now I've got 20 people, now I've got 30 people. And so what you need to do is you have to make sure that the lines of communication that are important are always down to some smaller subset of group of people that are small enough to get things done, right? The rule of thumb is 3 to 5 people can meet and get things done. Anything more than that is a status meeting, right? Or it's a presentation, because most of the people in the room cannot meaningfully participate. Which leads, this is one of my favorite slides. I keep reusing it. I apologize for the people that have seen it before. Kind of how I got to this point was I was doing a lot of methodology research for a tools company I was working at in the 90s, and because I would go around and speak on comparative methodologies, and people would go, well, which one is best? There's data-driven methodologies, object-driven methodologies, Jordan, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff. And there's no good empirical way to compare. How do I know that this project is better than that one because they followed this particular methodology because they didn't follow the other one? How do you do side-by-side sample? But the one thing I found is I found an IBM Global Services study where they took all of their projects, right, which was thousands and thousands of projects, all the variables they could capture. It's IBM, right? They could spend the time on this, right? They have plenty of time. And they only found one thing that correlated to project success, which was how close people sat together. Everything else washed out in the numbers. And what does that really means is that communication is the most important part of being successful when you're trying to work as a group and get something done. You step back and you think about it like that, it's kind of obvious, but you have to learn to think that way. If you're not successful, it's probably because people are not communicating effectively. Now, we've got Slack, we've got all these other things now, so they're video chat, conferencing. So it doesn't mean that they have to sit next to each other, but the communication has to be that comfortable and that confident, right, in order to move forward. So going back to the slide I was looking for earlier, when you put all that together, what you want when you're doing cross-functional work is you want a core team that's that 3 to 5 number of people that are responsible to carry that process through from beginning to end. So the most important people on the project should be involved from the beginning all the way through, whether they are actively doing work right now. So the QA person, the senior engineer should be involved from the beginning. Those discussions that are talking to the business about what are we trying to accomplish, what do we do, what are the choices? It's usually about choices not made. It's usually about problems that were discussed and solutions that were discarded. And so when that group of people meet continuously and work together all the way through, that's why over-specification is not such a big deal, because it's more important that those people understand what you're trying to accomplish than it is having every last little thing written down, right? If everybody really understands what you're trying to accomplish, as things get written, everybody will know what's important, right? And they'll be able to fill in their own pieces without a lot of heavy-handed oversight. Make sense? So, and that core team could involve a product manager or not, right? In my organization right now, I think we've got about 15 current cross-functional teams running. Probably half of them have a product manager involved. Many of them don't. Many of them are run by BAs. Some are run by engineers if they're more technical projects, right? So you have to think about who really needs to be involved, who has the best understanding, and how well can they work together in order to get from the beginning to the end. Problem number 3, lack of accountability. That may not be a problem in Minsk. I've certainly seen the problem in California. Some simple things. I mean, it's unclear, nobody really gets the assignment, everybody kind of ducks, so there's nobody seems to be in charge. One that was really popular, which drove me crazy, but it seems to be fading away, was the group is in charge. Very happy California stuff. Oh, we'll put the group in charge, which means that nobody's in charge. And then things that just get forgotten. The model that seems to work universally is what we call one throat to choke, right? For anything that's important, you may have a team of people. It may be a cross-functional team. It may be a functional team. The manager may be that throat to choke. But there has to be somebody who feels like it's their job to make sure this is going to happen and do whatever it takes to make it happen. And if realistically, you really need that person, and if you're in a small 3 to 5 person project team that's driving the whole thing, you need a backup as well, right? So when the first person keels over from exhaustion, there is the next person to pick up the slack. So back to our those cross-functional teams, one of those members is going to be the person in charge. And like I just described, it doesn't have to be a product manager, often is, depending on your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, but it can be anybody, right? And the skills for that are beyond just whatever their technical skills are. Going back to the early point about communication, communication is key. This person really needs to be somebody who knows how to reach out to everybody else. They need to know how to listen, and they need to know where to go to make sure that everybody that needs to be heard gets heard. The hardest part for managers is what I just described means that you actually have to trust the people that are doing the work. All right, so you have a small functional group. They are talking a lot. They're making sure that they're all in alignment. They understand where they're going. They are working out individually a lot of the pieces in order to fill it in because they trust each other to fill in those pieces. If you're all reviewing each other's work all the time, and if me as manager, I'm reviewing their work all the time, it all grinds to a halt anyway. So you really haven't picked up any of the leverage from, efficiently trying to manage the process with the right set of people. This takes a lot of practice. And I'm probably still failing on any given day. But you have to learn to trust people. We see a specific example of this in typical software organizations, and when I go in and start talking, this is almost always where I start. When I started doing this a long time ago, it was almost always organized where the product managers would be in the marketing department or in the business department, and then there would be an engineering manager, and the programmers would be in that department. Right, so big division right away. Everything has to get passed back and forth at the executive level to some degree. In the late 90s, I was at the tools company I talked about. We got acquired, and the marketing VP, who was a good friend, left because he had no interest in. He was smarter than I was. He did not want to get acquired by this company from Texas. So I had about a half a year as this worked its way through where temporarily I was put in charge of the whole thing. And suddenly half my problems went away because I was the one throat to choke. And if I needed the product managers to help out more, I could make that happen. If I needed the engineers to listen to the product managers, I could make that happen, right? If people were writing too much stuff or writing the wrong stuff, I could get them to work it out. Right. So, and a number of other, Jeff Barrett, a number of other people in San Francisco in the early 2000s, we started to experiment with this. The other thing that's happened is that, more and more of the software is games, and the games are coming more from a movie model where there are producers and there's a director, and the director is responsible to make it happen no matter what. So again, the one throat to choke. And so the combination of that we have slowly seen this change over time, where more and more organizations have they'll call, like my title right now is CTO, but on the org chart, I'm head of product, right? And everything, I have to make sure that everything works. That's about it. Problem number 4. Oh, this of all of them, this one is probably the most likely to get you fired. Inability to set expectations properly. And so you're building new software, you're accomplishing things that haven't been done before because that's why you're growing. People are interested in what you're doing. And so it's hard to be predictable, right? How long is it going to take to do something you haven't done before? You're not exactly sure, right? And the more you can live with the uncertainty, the faster you can go. Because if you have to be predictable, you have to slow things down, you have to put in lots of buffer, so on and so on and so forth in order to make it predictable. So you have to understand your organization's need for predictability and their tolerance for unpredictability. And those are also two very different things. Often there is a need for productivity, but the people that the executives you are working with are used to predictability that's not possible. So this makes it your job to educate them about the choice, right? Yes, we can make all of our dates. Just add 3 months to everything I said, we'll be fine, right? But, right? Understand that, okay, we're going to work as hard as we can, but 20% of the time we're going to be wrong, right? We have to be able to live with that. Can we live with that? Right? And if you're not on the same page with the people outside of your organization on this, it will be very painful. Related to that, inadequate metrics. So we're just trying to get stuff done as fast as we can, and it's chaos. The only way you're going to improve predictability is to count more stuff so that you have a basis to think about it again in the future. So making people do painful things like track actuals, right? It's not going to help you tomorrow, but over time it does two things. It gives you a basis of knowledge from which to work from, and guess what? The people filling in the actuals, they learn from that as well. They go, wow, I just put in 47 hours on something that I told my manager was going to take 12. You know, you do that often enough and everybody improves. So occasionally I see people go numbers crazy and they have too many metrics and they waste too much time tracking it all. But that's usually in big companies where they can afford all that waste anyway. The more common problem is not getting started soon enough. What else? Engagement, if you have any kind of product facing end users, is really important. And so as soon as you're starting to put things in front of people, you need to be, measuring different ways to see whether whether they like what you're doing, whether their usage patterns are matching your expectations and your business needs in order for the product to be successful. Problem number 6, lack of foresight. You have to, no matter how bad things are at the moment, you have to think that there is going to be a beginning to what you're doing, a middle to what you're doing, and an end to what you're doing. And so that takes a little self-reflection. It's just too easy to stay in the middle forever and not lift your head up. Because the only way you get to the end is to think about the end and start making priority decisions and thinking about trade-offs and getting the involvement of the business if they have expectations that don't line up with reality. And I will say another thing is that people, almost always rightly, you're trying to show progress, right? You're growing, you've got more expectations, you have to do more things. You have to do more stuff, you have to show that kind of progress. And so you do what you have to do today. And if you could spend 2% of your time thinking a little bit, especially as you're working with the engineers, about leaving some doors open for extensibility to your software later, it almost always pays dividends. The smallest amount of time to go, we could just hard code it like this, or step back and, at least in a few strategic places, try to make it so that the next things you could imagine possibly doing, maybe not even on the roadmap today, might be a little easier. Otherwise, you end up in the 2.5-year ghetto of a total rewrite. And yeah, that's not healthy for your career either. You've probably seen one of these before. Your boss comes and says, we need this by April 1st. And it's like, okay, what scope do we get to cut? Oh, we need it all by April 1st. All right, it's going to be crap. I mean, you get to, the classic is you talk to your business and you say you get 2 out of 3, pick which 2 you want. Do you want it to be good and do you want it to be on time? All right, well then we cut scope in order to make that happen, right? If you want it good and you want everything, then the date's going to be what the date's going to be. I'll get back to you. Well, I wouldn't put it that way exactly, but it's a more complicated world than that. I wrote a paper on this a while ago. I've got 7 dials, right? So I've got scale. How scalable is my solution? How extensible is my solution? What's the performance of my solution? How maintainable is my solution? That go along with, am I date-driven, scope-driven, or quality-driven? And it's good to think about these things. Those 7 things compose your release strategy. You may not know you had a strategy because you ignored most of these, but you have a strategy, right? And it's how you choose to weave those things into your plans, right? Scale, who cares? We don't have many users yet. We'll worry about that one next year. Okay, that could be that's your strategy. That could be fine. But these things should be a conscious decision. They should not be forgotten things that get picked up later, because then you do, of course, end up in the ghetto of a rewrite, and you are probably someplace else. The other mistake we see all the time is we just talked about the need to communicate. We talked about how people need to effectively work together to build things together and produce a group effort. But I need a programmer that knows X, who knows that skill. So we're gonna go hire that person. Don't care too much about the rest of it, but we need that skill. Works for about 2 weeks, and then it starts causing problems. Now, you can go overboard the other way, and this may be just me showing my age. It was too long to bring along, but at CTO Club now, we share a lot of stuff, and so I'm seeing some of the interviewing processes that some of the other organizations are going through, and it's mind-blowing. They have to stand up and give a presentation. They have to do several different group activities. Wow. I'd never get hired today. So, use your best judgment, but the point is, if communication is important, then that has to be something that you're really looking for, and you have to mean it. It's not just lip service until you can get the next person that knows a certain specific technology. Lack of diversity in the team. If you make it this far, you're doing well. A couple of examples here. This is from the people that make Pokemon Go. They were a bunch of white guys in California. And in the first, it wasn't until the product was out in the field that they realized that women tended to pat the Pokemon on the head. I'm not a Pokemon Go person, so I'm parroting this. And while the guys would poke it, right? And so when they were developing it, they had no women on their team. So there were all kinds of things about the experience that they just kind of sucked at. And their strong message to us as a group was, you need to the extent possible, get people with different backgrounds, men, women, fat, thin, different technical backgrounds, and you will end up with a better product, even if you have the same number of people with the same skills if they're more like each other, right? And the other thing is different kinds of people tend to challenge each other more, and it's always better to face those challenges internally than it is to have those challenges coming back to you from your clients or from the field, right? Another example was the Xbox. Again, a bunch of white guys in the West Coast in the United States. They all had hands our size, and didn't sell very well with, and so the controllers for the Xbox are of a certain size. Didn't work very well for women who had smaller hands. Terrible in Japan, couldn't sell at all. Eventually they got wise and they started to build their team with people. They're selling around the world. They started to build it with people from backgrounds that were from around the world as well. Not creating a culture of change. This is difficult, and it's also hard to talk about. My slide there shows an efficiency curve. So you've got your technology going up over time, and you've got a certain level of efficiency, and for a while it's comfortable, but if you push people too far, that VUCA is just a technical term for chaos, right? So you go from efficiency to chaos if your people are not ready for the amount of change that's being put in front of them. And so you need to be able to listen to see if your people are able to keep up with the rate of change, right? And if they're not, then you have to help align their expectations with the organization's expectations, or you have to go back and think hard about the capabilities of your organization and think about ways to, set the rate of change that's going to fit for your team, and then work with your team over time in order to break down the barriers that are keeping them from flexibly moving faster, whether it's, just your mechanical processes are so rigid that people can't get their minds out of that, or if the organization is just bouncing all over the place. That's a bad kind of change, but if that's the world you live in, you need to spend the time with your folks to let them know what that means to them and how they can participate in that change in a way that will be helpful to them and helpful to everybody else. Using the word no a lot is a bad thing, right? In any kind of culture of change, the listening and the accepting and the willingness to hear that more change may be necessary is extremely important. And this is another place where I've seen a lot of people falling down. There's a lot of change going on, and we know exactly what that's going to be. But a lot of the change is going to be unexpected, and you really have to be paying attention to it. And you have to, not only do you have to listen for it, but you have to be okay listening for it. Right. So hiring, again, we're in crisis mode. We're getting the people we need today. Often we don't see people thinking, well, how big is my team going to be in 6 months? Right? I've got 7 people on my team. We're pretty well balanced. We're growing quickly, and I've got a lead here, and things are fine. But in 6 months, I'm going to have 13 people, and that's more than one lead can handle. Where's that other element of leadership going to come from? And if you're not thinking about it, you'll get to 13, and it won't be there. So when you're thinking about hiring and you're bringing in those people and you're growing that organization, you need to be thinking about the needs and the balance you have today and the needs and the balance that you're going to have further down the road. Number 9. This one is also deadly, and you can't do a thing about it. Your organization will either be helping you or hurting you. Is the mission, is what the company is trying to accomplish, is it well understood and is it well known top to bottom? We just talked about the fact that we're going to have small cross-functional teams with leaders who you are going to trust to be autonomous, right? They have to align with what you want as head of product, but they also have to align with what what your products are trying to accomplish. And that's really important because a lot of the times as you weave your way through that product management process, the product will take on a life of its own, and you can forget some of the things that the product was intended to accomplish, right? And the only way to watch out for that, unless you like reviewing everything over and over again, is to make sure that everybody on that team not only understands what you're trying to accomplish with that product, but what the company overall is trying to accomplish and how that product fits into that company mission. Second one, values that make it clear what the individual is expected to do, right? Is this a culture where people are expected to work certain ways? Are they expected to do certain kind of hours, participate in certain events, so on and so forth? The next one's my favorite. Ideally, the executives in your company who are helping to set the mission for you to go after actually get along and work together. And I'd ask for a show of hands here, but that's probably not fair. There should be a definition of what measures your company is going to do, not only inside your department, but out in the other departments, so that you all are aligning with that mission. And leadership that models, how do I put that? The expectations of the individuals in the organization. You probably read a lot recently about various CEOs or various other leaders in tech and other places who behave terribly and then expect everybody in their organization is going to be right in there with them, right? So now most of that you can influence if you're an executive working with the others, you have a seat at the table. You're not in charge of that group. You can try to herd the cats along a little bit. But when, as you are getting involved in an organization, these are really important things to look for. Do they know where they're going? Can they explain it to you? Do they seem like good people that will treat their people well? If you are counting on communication and motivated self-growing teams, they need to see that same kind of spirit from their leaders. And the last one I've got is you and your skills. This one I stole from Jeff. So you've got the skills you need for your job and you're growing. And as you grow, as your organization grows and your team grows, your skills will need to change over time. So my green line there is when I'm starting off on the job. What did I do? When I'm starting off on the job, they probably hired me because. Yeah. Thanks. You probably got hired because you've got skills for the job. So I have my skill level right now, and it's green. I am under the bar for what's needed for this job. Right? Then things grow, and it gets to a size of an organization or a complexity that I haven't done before. And so there are skills that I don't have. And so I'm in the red. You will be in the red often. And so the question is, how quickly can you come out of it, all right? I get some training, I get some experience, I don't fail, nobody kills me, and now I'm able to operate at that level, I'm back in the green again. All right? More growth, same thing happens. Now, it seems kind of funny on the chart, but when you're serious about your job, this can take a personal toll, right? You know when you're kind of bouncing around in places you haven't been before, right? And you still have to maintain some level of confidence, rightly or wrongly. And the question is, can you pull yourself back into the green again? It's easy. You just go to the right, go on the other side of the line, and you're there. But look at this practically. When I started off, what was I doing? I was probably a CTO. There were 3 of us, and I was building software. And I was having a great time. I was one of those 3 people in the garage. And then we grew a team, and other people were doing the development, and I'm the one leading those people, helping them, looking at their stuff, talking to them, and that's a different set of skills. I actually have to talk to people now, or at least more often. Right? We get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then now I've got managers who have teams, and I'm a manager of managers. And my job is to make sure that I'm not doing anything useful. Because if I'm doing anything useful, it's a bad sign. The responsibilities aren't being distributed properly in the organization. And you become somebody who is coordinating activities, managing process, trying to help the team and your managers improve the overall flow of the organization. And then eventually, be an executive, and you'll have directors. And at that point, your job really is you're allocating resources, you're working with the other executives in order to set mission. And in big companies, basically, you're fighting for headcount all day at that point. I know myself. I know that when I get to level number 4, I'm not so good, right? That's a very different set of skills than, right now we've got about 70 people, I think, in my organization. So I'm still at level number 3, right? Someday we will be successful, but I'm hoping that success will come when we're bought, and at that point there will be a big-time executive who's used to leading teams of 200 and spending their day in that way. Right. So that's what I got. And I've been able to do very well over the years with the startups, and we've talked a lot about people and communication and how teams need to work effectively together. Leadership is crucial. I read something the other day, I think it was something in Forbes, said something like the difference between teams with good leaders and bad leaders in some study was like a 70% difference in how things turned out. Leadership coming from you and throughout your organization, and for your managers and even those point people who are managing those small flexible teams is really important. And what does that mean? That means that you can communicate what you're trying to accomplish. You can help people when they're not doing well. You listen well, and you set the right kind of example. Right? If you can do those things, and you can surround yourself with people that can do those things, you will be successful. So, questions?
You can ask questions just raising your hand.
Where's the beer? Oh, sorry.
My first question is about what you think about the difference between C-level officer and the leader.
Oh, the difference between a C-level officer and a leader? Well, a C-level executive is somebody who has a title, and they have a budget, and they have a set of responsibilities within the organization that, that they have to accomplish. A leader can be an executive. A leader can be the secretary. The leader is the person who will identify problems, motivate people, and help people get to where they need to go. It's more common than you would probably imagine that C-level people are not always good leaders. When you find an organization with good leadership at the C-level, that's a good place to be. Was that an answer for you? Yeah, okay.
So, thanks. And the second question is about the mission of your startups. I saw that you have founded so many startups, and my question is about the mission or vision of your startup, or previous or current project. What was the first mission? Or you can define your mission after some months or years with your team?
Mission first. I mean, especially in the startup world, unless you're rich, you need money. In order to get money, you need to be able to explain to somebody with money what you're going to accomplish. So mission almost always comes first.
I have a few comments and a question. First of all, when you were talking about predictability versus productivity, you mentioned that it's the manager's job to set expectations, and I guess it's also important to build the trust first. I mean, when you are to communicate something to stakeholders, they will be more ready to accept the message when they trust you.
Yeah, there's something called a honeymoon period when you start a new job. They hired you. You must be good because you're there and they were smart enough to hire you, right? If you weren't any good, they wouldn't have hired you. They would never admit they were stupid. So you need to take advantage of the honeymoon period to build that communication trust on the truth as quickly as you can, and take the pain up front. If you have, if your boss or the other executives don't really have a realistic understanding of how software works, and the fact that sometimes we're going to be late if we're going to push as hard as we can, then you need to take advantage of that honeymoon period and educate them. And if you can't do that during the honeymoon period, then you have a hard decision to make. Seriously, do you leave the organization because you won't be effective for that company if they won't listen to you, or if you can tell them the truth but they don't want to hear it, right? Or is it good enough that you can live with it, right? But it's a pain that will never ever go away. It's something you want to try to set right at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good answer. And why do you think that shared responsibility is necessarily the bad thing? Because in a agile world, we would like the team members to share the responsibility for the team results, for hitting the goal.
All right, so in what you described, those team members are all responsible for their part of making something happen, right?
Right.
But somebody has to be responsible to make sure that they are doing the right things at the right time. Because what happens when things aren't going right? Then who's going to fix it? If everybody is just, we're all in this together, but there's nobody responsible to really make it happen, then when there are problems, you're counting on every team member being smart enough and motivated enough to jump up and go, that's mine, I'm going to take care of it. And the real issue with that is that many of the problems are because they are things that are not thought of, that fall between the cracks of the responsibilities the way you laid them out, right? So that can be very hard.
Yeah, but at another hand, when people are looking for a way to be more effective working in that team, well, actually, I remember the time I was part of the development team, and here I developed some code in the past.
Really?
Yeah. And I was always thinking about appropriate testing of the code to not deliver something that is gonna block the work of my colleague.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, is an example of like shared responsibility. So we have to deliver high quality code.
Right. The group as a whole has to deliver high quality code for everybody. Right. So somebody's got to be responsible for that. Then there's your code. You're responsible for your code, and you have to make sure that's high quality. Yes. So yeah, you have individual responsibility for that. It's QA is not responsible to deliver quality code. You are, or you were.
Yeah.
Or else you're destined for management, right?
So, would it be accurate to say that shared responsibility on individual tasks is not going to work because no one is going to?
Look, it always depends on the people and how they like to work together. There are certainly cases, paired programming. Great relationships between QA and specific engineers where they really do operate almost as a single person. There's no problem with that. But you need to be aware that that's what you're counting on, and you know that they're collectively going to always move together as one.
Okay, and my last question is about the concept or recommendation to look for options for future extensions in the software. I mean, to think ahead a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally saw a few projects which completely failed because the team was more focused on developing great architecture and software which is able to do anything, rather than delivering the product that solves a single small problem for users.
That certainly happens, right? They usually don't last very long. At least in my world, they'll get around to money and they'll be explaining the progress that they're making with that money, and it will come to a pretty quick end. It's usually the other way, but certainly it's a balance. I certainly have seen that.
It should be a balance between
Yeah.
a possible extension of the product and focus on what the users need.
And the other thing is that often when you're in those situations where people are polishing up just fantastic software, where's the money? Things have to be out there to bring money in, right? Or to maybe if that's not the world you're in, at least accomplishing goals. And more frequently you see people, because they've been given money and the VCs or their bosses have a set of expectations on what's going to be accomplished in a certain time period, that everything gets thrown out the window and they're just running as fast as they can, right? Yeah, so it is a balance.
Thank you. This is a very good answer because I am, as a manager, have to explain the development teams the need for the balance between great software, well polished, and delivering something that can generate cash flow for the customer.
And you also have to be aware of the kind of software you're building and what you're trying to accomplish, right? So we're building enterprise software that we sell to lots of large clients, which means the next large client is probably going to want something not exactly the same as the last time. So leaving those doors open is really important, no matter how painful it is. But if I'm making a pizza delivery app and it's only ever going to be a pizza delivery app, then, right? So then the need isn't as great. You think ahead to what are the possible features I might need to add to my pizza delivery app down the road, but it doesn't have to be a beautifully polished architecture anticipating 15 different variations in the future.
Okay, thank you.
I totally agree with you when you're talking about diversity, but shouldn't work for all areas. I mean, it's widely spread idea here that when we hire technical staff for our company, we should hire the best guys we can find, not paying attention to any other things. I mean, architects, developers. In our world, it's nearly impossible to find a black developer in Belarus. And if I found these guys, but it's only developers, should I hire this guy, or I should pay attention to his skill?
That's an excellent, difficult question. I don't know where you find black people in Belarus either. It's a judgment. How are you determining they're good in the interview process? I guess that's the other question. I read something recently, and what it said was that there was a tendency among people to hire people like themselves, and their interviews were keyed, it kind of led down that path. And so if I'm an abstract thinker and I'm a good technician, those are the people I'm going to be attracted to in the interview process. I may not be as attracted to some people who are excellent communicators, but not as good abstract thinkers. And over time, I like to see a balance. You do like to see a mix of skills come in. And in some cases, in many cases, I have passed on the best technical interviews of people I could have taken in favor of people who I knew were going to be motivated, because it's not only where are you at the moment, but where do you think they're going to be in 2 or 3 years? And so, I'd say I've passed on some of the best technical interviews I've had because I knew that they weren't going to fit in. It's about doing things as a group, but obviously you can't hire a group full of mediocre people, or you will have mediocre solutions. So I'm afraid I can't help you much more than that. In the back.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for meet up today for us. And my question would be we're scaling startups, and at what point startups stop being startup? And what are key differences between a startup and, let's say, repeat business or working business model?
The question is, when is a startup not a startup anymore? When they're cash positive, right?
That's the only difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you're public, or you've been, but Because until you're cash positive, you are not charting your own destiny. Your investors are charting your destiny. As long as you need money, they will be heavily involved. And that's part of being a startup, is dealing with the pressure and the anxieties of venture capitalists. And they tend to stay anxious until it's a slam dunk, which is usually when they can see that you're going to break even or better. Not always. It could be if you're showing tremendous progress and you're still burning a lot of money, but the successful outcome seems almost certain. Then you start acting more like you can start acting more like a non-startup.
And the follow-up question would be, is there a stark difference in demand from the people who build the product once they become a business versus a startup? And how to sustain the success moving forward for the team to, okay, we now make money, how we continue to make money, more money?
I'm sorry, I did not catch the beginning of the question.
And, when we turn to business that makes money, right, well, that's change happens in demand from the team who build the product, from qualities or skills to actually work in different perspectives when they no longer start up, but now are a company that makes money.
It's very situational, but when you get to that point, the organization usually values predictability more than productivity, because they're not under the same kind of pressure to get to break even, where throw everything off the boat, we're going as fast as we can. At that point, they've got customers. Those customers have expectations. The sales force has expectations for repeatable success, and predictability becomes more important. When predictability becomes more important, some of the management skills change, and often you'll see a turnover in some of the leadership on the technical side.
Thanks.
Could you please share your thoughts on what drives the team or the whole project in the best way? My question about setting goals. There are two approaches. When we set precise KPIs and that should be completed, and setting ambitious goals that may not be completed in full, but they are ambitious and inspiring, and if we complete them in 60 or 70%, it's a good result. So the question about what is the best approach? Precise KPIs or ambitious goals?
Excellent question. I think it goes back to to some degree, it may go back to the predictability versus productivity. I mean, when you're trying to get things done quickly, I like ambitious goals, because you've already decided that getting there as fast as you can or quickly is more important than being absolutely precise on setting expectations. So I think it revolves around that. I mean, I personally like to be in the productivity space rather than in the predictive space. Once you get to the predictive space, the organization has usually grown to the point where I'm not enjoying my job so much anymore. So I personally like ambitious goals, but I don't want to give that as a universal answer because it might get you in trouble.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, for sharing your experience. My question is pretty simple. What are the top 3 things, in your opinion, that make a product successful?
That make a product successful. if the product, I mean, number one has to be that if the product accomplishes the objectives that were set out by the company, that it fills the mission that the company needs it to fill in order for the company to be successful. What would 2 and 3 be? Number 2 would be that the team working on the product, it feels fulfilled by the mission, and because the motivation and you never want to lose those skills. You never want to lose a team that's been working well together. So for me, did we do what we needed to do for the company? Did we do what we needed to do for all the individuals on the team so that they felt good about what they were doing as we went along? I don't know what I would say for number 3. Yeah. Money, I don't know. Alcohol.
Hello. I have a question. If we grow a startup from the end, from the start, from the ground, the better gathering team with high leadership level or just average, and to grow leaders from the average level?
Good leaders are always hard to find. If you find them, take them. Right? If you can't find them, grow them. Give them the opportunity. I mean, and that means giving them the opportunity to fail so that they can learn. I think the study I read recently was that 10% of the managers in some broad survey were considered to be effective leaders. Another 20% were considered potential leaders, and this isn't programmers. This was a management study who should all be leaders. So. Those are good people to have.
Let's start with
The most important thing when you're starting up is that you work effectively together, right? That's first, right? So if you've got 2 other people that you're working with and you look at each other and go, none of us is a great leader at this moment, but you work well together, that's the most important thing. As you grow, you will need to add leadership. Right.
But the question, if we have not one leader, maybe some decisions can hard to be involved, like they can bump each other, and what the question? That's the question.
Oh, when you're in a small group, yes, and you're working together, and there's no person that's like, well, this is mine. And that's often the way it is in startups, and that's the way it often needs to be, because you need that tension, and you're doing this together, and because you're all committed together, in many cases the dynamic is that you can't just arbitrarily say, well, there's 3 of us, and hey, I'm the big guy, right? And then, it just doesn't work. Right? So, sorry, I lost the thread there.
So, Keith, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I believe all of us we appreciate very much the fact that you have your time to share this story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great questions and good luck.